folks, and welcome to another edition of The Inconvenient Truth. My name is Diamond with the Oppenheimer Ranch Project. We're going to be talking about preparing for the mini ice age with our returning guest, Dr. Anita Bailey, Ph.D., author of Cold Times, Preparing for the Mini Ice Age. Dr. Bailey, are you with us?
I am, and glad to be here, Diamond.
Excellent. We have some updates for our listening audience tonight. We have a new producer who actually linked us up for the first time. Hopefully we'll have a clear conversation tonight. Can you hear me loud and clear, Dr. Bailey?
I can.
Well, this is pretty exciting. I'm very excited to get started discussing. We're going to keep with the plan. We've been discussing 3 chapters each week. We are on chapters 7, 8, and 9, which are slightly unrelated. Chapter 7 is about small livestock, which I think are going to be very important when planning in a long term. And then keeping warm and power and light are very important and very general and very broad topics, which we could probably go on and on about. So we're going to start with small-scale livestock tonight. But before we get into the discussion, Dr. Bailey, can you just, we haven't talked all week. For those listening, we don't really talk on a regular basis. So I just want to get your feel for what's happening right now with the 4th nor'easter going up the East Coast. I just checked the statistics from the state of New Jersey, and it went from 5,000 customers without service to 68,000 in just the last 6 hours, and it's still going up. And the storm's not over yet, and then there's a huge storm coming on the West Coast, which is about to cause 5 inches of rain plus 5 feet of snow in the Sierras. What's your impression about what's happening with the weather and how the general public, you feel, is reacting?
Well, I have not seen many reports on the mainstream media of how people are reacting, but I can pretty well guess, given behaviors of the past. I know we are seeing empty shelves everywhere. Southern California is kind of an interesting case. Of course, the cold up north in the Northeast, you would imagine that people who have been through that now for as long as these nor'easters have gone on would have got some of the message and said, I'm just going to put in some extra supplies and maybe something to cook on just in case. I would hope. In Southern California, it's a whole other story now. I may have mentioned I was raised in Los Angeles, and weather like they're having now was just unheard of back then. If we had a bad rainstorm, it was a day with an inch, maybe 2 inches. And the numbers I'm hearing now are absolutely mind-boggling. Over the years in Southern California, they developed a number of drainage canals in the places where rivers had been. And if you remember that old movie from the 50s, Them, about the giant ants that lived in the drainage areas, those things, last time I was in L.A., which was, oh goodness, almost 20 years ago, those same channels were still there. And every now and then there'd be a flood because concrete doesn't absorb water, and it would go in these canals and pretty much just not bother anybody. Clean out the canals real good. But you're hearing now, after the fires with the hills coming down and people being evacuated, I almost can't wrap my mind around that scenario for that part of the world. Up in the Northeast, once again, I remember when I was a kid, which was well over half a century ago, that Buffalo was known for its terrifically cold and snowy winters. But in the interval, I don't recall there being such bad weather as there is now. What about you?
Well, here is the unfortunate facts about climate science. Climatology itself, when you look at it at every scale, is a cyclic feature of the planet Earth, where we have these long-scale cycles, and we have some moderate-scale cycles, and we have short-term cycles. Now, the short-term climatic cycle for the northern hemisphere that is most pronounced is the 200-year warming and the 200-year cooling cycle, which is a 400-year major grand minima or a 200-year minor grand minima. Modern society has just been built up in the last 100 years during the very center of one of these warmer blips of the climate cycle parameters. So the canals that were being built for the infrastructure out west were designed for a warming climate during the warming phase of the cycle, which is where there's less rain, less cosmic rays, and less atmospheric rivers, like we're seeing time and time again coming in the West Coast. So that type of infrastructure is going to quickly fail, and really they underestimated the potential climatic shifts that are potential in our systems. So what we're seeing with the flooding starting a decade ago in Louisiana during those major storms, that's going to continue to happen because the levees were underestimated. They were estimated based on flooding events that were happening during a warming period on Earth. The warming period stopped over a decade ago, 2 decades ago, and we're now rapidly going to be cooling very rapidly in the next 2 decades, and all of the infrastructure that was designed for the last 150 years is going to quickly fall apart, and that's the sad state of affairs.
I absolutely agree. You can see the early signs of it. Where I live now in the Ozarks, it's near a little river town, and that area in the past 2 years has had 300-year floods. And if we get the rain that we're supposed to get in April, we'll have our 4th one. That doesn't mean it's a 100-year flood anymore. It's a commonplace every-year flood. And it's taken out houses and farms and livestock and everything else because people have built down within that river floodplain because it's good fertile soil. Unfortunately, it's fertile because it floods, and that's just not going to change. There's no way to correct that problem by adding concrete or infrastructure or anything like that. It is what it is. So yes, we're certainly seeing some significant changes. Are you seeing that in Europe?
With these changes, Dr. Bailey, the drainage patterns across North America and the Northern Hemisphere, as well as the Southern Hemisphere, the drainage patterns throughout Europe, Asia, they're going to change very quickly. So areas that used to be dry, where there are arroyos or dry washes, are now going to be raging rivers. Some places that had raging rivers are actually going to be more dry. So areas that used to be wet and receive lots of rain will have droughts, and the opposite will occur, and vice versa. So a lot of these homes, the infrastructure for the last 100 years, we've been building on these rivers. We've been building on these floodplains. These drainage patterns are going to quickly shift, and there's going to be loss of hundreds of thousands of homes in the next few decades simply from rain, because the totals are going to be unlike anything ever recorded regionally. It was recorded prior to 1820, say, but there's no information on it, which is why they built in these stupid regions. But plus, we have historical information of cities like Houston being under 15 feet of water every 60 years. It's a cycle. It has nothing to do with man or global warming. It has to do with the cyclic nature of climate on Earth. Anything else you want to add before we jump into the chapters?
Yes, it's on a psychological level. It's interesting to me that we want to blame people for these things, and certainly there's evidence that occurred during the Maunder Minimum with the witch trials. It's somebody's fault if the weather goes bad, if there's a flood, if we lose a crop, and if we pick out whoever we think is responsible and castigate them or throw them out of our group or minimize what they have to say, then the problem will automatically go away. That's an interesting feature of human thought. Maybe we can get into that at some later point, but it's just there, and it's good to know that we can see that and realize that just because we feel it or think it doesn't mean it's necessarily true.
Right, and the society that we have bred over my entire lifetime, 5 decades, has been a society that has become more and more reliant on the system. I remember as a kid, we talked about this in past shows, about my aunts and my grandparents and great-grandparents all having a large supply of dry food and canned goods put up for at least a year's worth of food. If you locked the door, whoever was in that house could live for a year easily. That doesn't happen almost anywhere in the world. And the times that are changing that we're going into, it's going to be a very scary time, because when the events do occur, when the shipments don't get to the store, people are just going to sit and wait, which is exactly what you do not want to be doing. You need to be going to secure food and locating food. And I don't think our society is prepared. And in fact, in North America here, you can see there are even FEMA and other groups coming out in the last week admitting that the population is not prepared for a major event. Not at all. Not even 1%.
That's true. There was a famous recent quote by the new head of FEMA last year after the 2 bad hurricanes, where he said, we don't have a culture of preparedness anymore. And he advocated trying to redevelop one from the bottom up, training children, teaching kids, the old Boy Scout motto, be prepared. That's gone. And that's a feature in part of our technological society, which provides us such a cushion and a blanket between us and the world of reality. There's always somebody there who can lend a hand or help you, or you can call the auto club, or whatever it is. And that has given us this false conception of reality as being filled with helpers, so that we don't have to personally have skill or personally know how to do something. I mentioned last time that I saw a fella in a home store buying a cherry tomato plant. He had no idea. This was an older man. No idea how to grow the plant, how to care for it, and was grilling the poor salesperson on how to grow a cherry tomato. And certainly if you've ever planted one, they're almost impossible to kill. They just grow so fast and are so productive. It's another thing that boggles my mind, how someone could reach an advanced age and never have had the experience of growing something as simple as cherry tomatoes, or probably growing anything in that fella's case. But anyway, on to the topic.
Yeah, what I think we're going to see as the months progress, going into spring here and into the summer, is a new message coming out of the mainstream media, where they're actually going to start to train for preparedness for a large volcano or earthquake in many of the accident-prone areas. I think this is because the powers that be are starting to understand the numbers are coming in, and they're getting very worried about their own safety. And if just at least we can get 5 or 10% of the population prepared, that will give them a window to either escape or hide or get to safety. Whereas right now, it's looking very bleak, and we're talking about millions of incompetent people in place right now in major cities that will not have any idea what to do when a major event happens.
Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, even with the many years of my own background in preparedness, if the power goes off, my first thought is, when is it going to come back on? It's not rush out and, eat all the ice cream in the freezer because it'll never come back on. It's, it'll be on in a little while, because they always get it on. So if that's in my head, I know it's in everybody else's head. And consequently, if we have a situation where the power goes down and they don't get it repaired quickly, who don't have some backup skills and backup supplies are really going to have a hard time, really have a hard time.
Yeah, so as we move forward, what I think we're going to experience is events, sweeping events that are broad-based across the globe where these types of things unfold, where there is a whole region that loses power for a week, let's say. And we are actually going to have the information coming out of those regions, what occurs. So that being said, let's... because the southern hemisphere is now headed into winter, and as the grand solar minimum progresses, we've saw a major uptick in the northern hemisphere just this winter, and now it's spring and the winter is not over, and the GFS models are showing major blizzard activity through the northern plains well into late April. So we're going to have lots of interesting storms developing across North America for the next month or so. While the southern hemisphere continues to intensify in this effect. So I think the southern hemisphere is going to experience some major power outages in the next 6 months, where we'll actually see regions, like in New Zealand maybe, without power for days. And then we'll actually be able to gauge what occurs. And that will give us some insight into, and also will spark the rest of the population into preparedness. So it might be like an ongoing chaotic thing globally that unfolds over the next year. How do you feel about that idea?
That sounds just about like I'm kind of imagining things would go. You'll see one region go down, everybody rushes in to try and help, and they get back on their feet, kind of like in the hurricanes last year, and then another region goes down and more people rush in to help. Eventually, people run out of help. You exhaust your resources, you exhaust your helpers, and then what? Now, if it's going around the world, you have calamities where it just doesn't get repaired. I'm thinking of down there in Puerto Rico where they're having such trouble getting their power back up. Some of those people have been without power since the event, and there's no business. There's no plumbing. There's no capacity to turn on a light or run a machine. How are they living? How are they functioning? If someone was down there studying that, they probably could give us some really good advice on how people survive horrific circumstances. But remember, it's not freezing cold down there either. You're not having a sudden snowstorm on top of this. So we have a lot to think about, and if someone has not prepared, I certainly would encourage them to take the steps right now. No waiting, right now. Well, wait till the show's over, and then go ahead.
Yeah, give us an hour and a half. And now, so in discussing this, so let's picture that scenario. We've got these rolling multi-day power outages in South America in 6 months, or in the southern hemisphere, and it's being reported on, and then the northern hemisphere starts to get a little wise, and then they start going out to the store. And instead of bread and milk being off the shelves, no one can find a generator, flashlights, things like this start to become very rarefied. And then that drives panic through the masses, because what if you're late in getting to the party and you go out to the Walmart and you can't find a flashlight? Don't you panic at that point?
If I didn't have a flashlight, I'd be pretty worried about it. Back in 7, in the area I live in, there was an ice storm that covered pretty much the whole Ozark region. It knocked out power to our little town. Some areas were without power for 2 weeks. We were very fortunate. Ours came back on in 3 days. But the local Walmarts, one of them was actually closed, which in itself is a shocking experience. The Walmart's closed. It must be the end of the world. And we had gone to a second one, which only had power because it was on the same circuit as the big local hospital. And the power people had worked very hard to restore that power first. Well, that Walmart had power, but it couldn't take credit cards. And the gas station next to it also could not take credit cards. So you had people waiting in line, and there was no way to buy gas. They're buying 35 cents of gas because that's what they had in their pocket. At the Walmart, the shelves in the bread aisle, of course, were empty because they empty first. But also missing was all of the cold cuts. The beer was gone, understandably. Canned soups, empty. All of the ice melter was gone. The camping supplies were gone. I was actually kind of a little surprised at that, but it makes sense because if you don't have electricity, you want a camp lamp and a little 1-pound propane canister to power it. So people got the right things out of the store. There was plenty of clothes if you wanted to do clothes shopping. But the essential food items were picked through. There was a few little open smash containers of various things, but most of that was gone. And this was a local storm in a local region that was being repaired rather quickly because there was electric grid people coming from all over the Midwest to help repair. Well, suppose the whole Midwest has an entire storm like that. Where are our repair people going to come from? So, yes, the store shelves empty. There were fights in the aisles at that particular store over batteries, the last of the C batteries. There was no A batteries, no AAA batteries either. So people are going to be people. They're going to behave the way people have always behaved. If we look at history, we know how people behave. And to imagine that it's going to be different this time is not dealing with the actual reality of how people are. What do you think of that?
Well, I think it's a very unfortunate state of affairs for the majority of the population because when these things start to unravel, there are not going to be, quickly tractor trailers full of camping supplies coming into these regions that get hit. And then that time that you waste panicking about not having supplies or trying to locate them could have been time spent doing something else that it might have helped you survive. So on the 3 chapters we're going to talk about tonight, let's talk about chapter 8 first, then 9, and jump back to 7 if we have time, because I think the most important chapter that people can learn about is keeping warm. Because if these events unfold, if it is major storms, they happen for days or weeks at a time, when the power goes off, people that are unprepared to keep warm, that are in suburban areas or city areas, are not going to have heat. They don't have fireplaces. They don't have wood-burning stoves. So there's some practical information in this chapter I'm sure you could share with our listeners about having to keep warm. So if you could just give us a synopsis of the chapter and just run with it, we can just talk about it.
Okay. Well, there's 3 primary ways of keeping warm, and that is to warm yourself, to warm your environment, or to warm a thing and then get warmth off of that. Warming yourself is almost instinctive. When people get cold, they tighten up, they close up, the shivering starts, and you start looking for a warm spot. If we are facing long-term cold, that's a huge drain on your body energy, and you need more food. And the principal food that's helpful for keeping you warm are fats. But I'd like to also address the clothing requirements. Now, once again, coming from Los Angeles, we had summer and mostly summer and close to summer, but we didn't really have the terrible cold like we have in the Midwest, and certainly nothing like they're having in the Northeast. So when my first experience with cold was our first winter in the Ozarks, and it wasn't even that cold of a winter, but we had an largely uninsulated old farmhouse and a big old wood heat stove to keep it warm. We also had electric baseboard heat, but we stopped using that right away because it would have been cheaper to make a pile of money on the floor and set fire to it than use that heat. So the heater was not able to warm the entire house, but you were warm if you laid next to it or sat next to it. Well, you can't do that all day. You got to get up and do things. So my introduction to cold was one of those Zen slaps where you just go, this is really not nice, not fun, and we got to do something different. So people who live in ordinarily fairly warm areas, you're going to have to think very long and hard about your capacity to deal with very, very cold weather. People up in Minnesota, Michigan, Maine, they've probably got a lot of the supplies they need and know how to dress properly. Keeping yourself warm is a matter of putting on layers. And the way you put on layers is to start with some long underwear, preferably something that's a wool blend, but polypropylene works good. And then a shirt or undersweater over that, and then a jacket over that. And if you need to, I'd throw in a down vest in there somewhere. So clearly, if you're dressing that heavily, you need a jacket that's going to be bigger than your ordinary size, which you would wear with just a T-shirt underneath it. Cotton is not your friend. If you have cotton clothing, it's almost like putting a cold weather target on yourself. Wilderness survival experts say cotton kills, or cotton will kill you, because cotton allows your body to leak heat. Wool stores heat next to your body. So you want to aim toward clothing that stores heat. At this time, if you have some money to spend, go on down to some sporting goods stores. Winter's coming to an end, so they're starting to put their cold weather clothing on sale. Look online. Places like Sportsman's Guide, I think it's called. A lot of sales starting there where you can get some nice winter clothing relatively cheap. Start stocking up. That's all I can say on that.
I have a few tips on the clothing side.
Okay.
And I found that if you research the top of the line winter clothing, which is going to be microfiber wools and then those poly blends, again, stay away from cotton, you can get a nice bullet list or see what some of these things look like, and then find a list of your local thrift stores and go there in the spring season after the winter. I find $100 pullovers and pants and underwear there for $3, and I am constantly stocking up, on the top end wilderness supplies for just pennies on the dollar by doing my research and then going to the thrift stores.
Bingo, that's it exactly. Nice wool sweaters for a couple of bucks. Me personally, when I go to a thrift store, and I still shop those babies, if I see something that's 100% wool, I'll buy it. A couple of bucks, doesn't hurt. Put it in a plastic bag and store it somewhere. At some point, you'll need it. And you can cut it down, make it smaller for someone else in your family, make it more form-fitting if you like, or turn it into a comforter or gloves. It's real easy to make those half mittens using the sleeve ends on sweaters. You just cut them off and cut a thumb hole. Boom, you've got some nice warm gloves that will keep your hands comfortable indoors, and you can slip into mittens when you go outside. So yes, a thrift store is your friend. Look for wool blankets there while you're at it, because there's nothing that'll keep you as warm as wool, wet or dry. Even wet wool will keep the warmth around you. Down's good, but if it gets damp or wet, it won't keep you as warm. It's a good place to shop. Are you a big proponent of down, Diamond?
I like down. I do. It could be, out of reach for some people, but again, thrift stores. I found down jackets at thrift stores, and I think that in the future, if our society is really sent back into the Stone Age by an EMP or something affecting the grid, we're going to need down, so we're going to be needing to raise these birds that provide us with the down. Let's talk about different types of ways to heat your home, because when the event happens that the propane truck delivery guy can't come or the fuel oil truck guy can't come, what do you do? Now, it's important for those listening that live in a city or in an area that they don't think they're going to be preparing for to have a place to go immediately and quickly. In a major event where you think that there's going to be long-term waiting, you have 24 to 72 hours to get to a safe place, because the rest of the public is going to panic and bottleneck you into that spot. So the sooner you react, the better. So have a preparedness plan set up ahead of time if you're in one of those areas to get out to a rural place at a friend's house that lives in the country that has a stove or a fireplace and a stockpile of wood. If you don't know any of these places, you really should be looking into meeting new friends. This is one of the keys to survival in an event that everyone is waiting for and that can happen at any time. You have to be ready to react. How do you feel about the ready to react idea, Anita?
Absolutely, and ideally you want to beat the crowd. So if you see that terrible storm coming in and they're predicting 15 feet of snow or 6 or 5, that might be a good time to load up and go visit those friends in the country. You don't want to be trekking out of an area like that in a blizzard. You'll die. So you need to make plans so that you protect yourself, especially if you've got a family and you've got little kids. My goodness. Similar to before a hurricane, if you get the warning that it's coming in and it's going to be bad, don't wait. Don't think you're special because the weather doesn't care about you. You have to take care of yourself and your family.
Yeah, so we saw that unravel in Florida this year. It's going to happen next year. Now, for those listening, a lot of people on my channel, which is the Oppenheimer Ranch Project on YouTube, are asking me about the hurricane season. If you go look in the past, we haven't had the most dangerous hurricane season for the last few decades. In fact, for the last 10 years, 6 of them have almost been devoid of major hurricanes. And then all of a sudden, we see an uptick in hurricanes. Well, by studying the historic past, you can see in grand minimas that there are major hurricanes that occur in places that they typically haven't occurred in the past, and they occur in amazing fashion because people are not prepared. Well, people in Florida are prepared for hurricanes. I mean, they see them all the time. And this year we saw people waited too long for a hurricane that got a little too strong, a little too quickly, and then they decided to leave. Now, what happened in Florida was a bottleneck up in the northern area because there's only 2 main highways, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, that takes you out of the state. And it literally looked like refugee camps. My brother lives down there, and they got out to Georgia, but the whole state was evacuating. Over 70% of the people were leaving, and it was a nightmare. He likened it to Armageddon. He couldn't even explain. There were people on the sides of road stops begging for money. They had been there for days, and that was just a small Category 3 hurricane.
That's kind of sad. That's sad and scary. I remember reading somewhere that in the 1700s, the San Francisco coast, that area there, was known as a hurricane coast. And that would fit within the cold times of the past. The weather's different. It's just different. And it's so different that we who have lived in one of the best, most wealthy, most warm periods in recent human history, we almost can't comprehend that kind of weather. And yet our ancestors lived it. They lived it with a whole lot less stuff and less access to food than we have now. They survived it. If they could do it, we could do it. We just have to understand that things will be different going forward. And that's part of that whole process of keeping yourself warm. Getting back to that area there, keeping yourself warm in a building. Well, the building is a natural protection against the weather. I used to say that a house is just a way to keep rain from falling on your head. And it's a way to keep the snow off as well. But it's also a way to keep the warmth around you. So if your house is or your apartment of whatever you're living in is fairly well insulated, you have an immediate defense. You look at pictures, drawings, and illustrations from back in the 1700s, and you see people indoors, artwork, who are dressed up in outdoor clothing, jackets, and they have a muffler around their neck, maybe a fairly warm cap on their head. And I used to look at those and think, well, the artist is using some license because they're painting the guy's nice clothes or whatever. But they were dressed like that because it was cold. It was cold indoors. They're sitting around a fireplace and they're wearing hats and gloves and heavy jackets because it's cold. So that's something that we have forgotten. A lot of people come indoors and they, kick their shoes off and they're down in their socks walking around the house. That works now when we have heating, but in the future, if the heat's off, your feet are going to get cold really fast. So you need to have the means to keep your feet warm, and that's not a pair of cotton socks or some thin nylon socks. You need those heavy wool socks, and you need slippers or some other kind of footwear that you can move around the house in without clumping in your outdoor boots. Close off any room you're not using. It will get cold. That room will get cold. So you don't want to close off a room where you have water pipes, because if it's cold outdoors and that room takes on that temperature, you'll have frozen pipes. Now you've got a real big problem. And try to keep the warmth around you. Curtains over doorways, over windows, heavy curtains. If you don't have heavy curtains, take a blanket off the bed and hang it up over that window. It will make a difference. Your house will be dark, so I hope you have lamps or some other way to keep it light in there. But at least you won't freeze. At no time should you bring in your outdoor barbecue grill and like that, because you'll kill yourself. It puts out carbon monoxide. As tempting as it may be to be warm and cook food, do not do it. However, if you, even if you light a couple of candles produce warmth. A lamp that produces a significant amount of warmth is an Aladdin lamp. They're an oil-based lamp, and they burn very brightly and give a good, clear light, about 40 watts worth. You can read by it or do needlepoint or any of those other things that require a clear, fine, steady light. But it also puts off a tremendous amount of heat. So a couple of Aladdin lamps in a room that is closed off will keep you warm without killing you with carbon monoxide. Just be sure you have some airflow in there. Crack a window open or make sure you have your curtain open enough at the bottom that there's a little airflow going in and out. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I love the oil lamp idea. They're inexpensive. For $10 you can get a supply of oil. $10 you can get a lamp. You can even find these lamps at thrift stores. You can buy new wicks in sporting goods areas and in other department stores for other types of oil lamps that you can rig up in older lamps. It's just a piece of fabric that wicks the oil from the base unit up into where you light it on fire and allowing it to hit the air. You can easily figure out how to fix those lamps. They provide heat and tons of light for living, and which is why they were used at the turn of the century by many people, because it's all they had, and it's actually what kept them warm, and they sat near it, and that's where they did their reading before they went to bed. So the lamp is a great idea. Another thing, if you're in a super survival situation where the power is cut and you're in an apartment or a high-rise, and you have a hot water tank, you can go into the bathroom and shut the door and fill the tub with the remaining hot water, and it'll keep the room warm for around 24 hours. as that cools down. And then if you're that desperate, you want to be moving during daylight and get out. Don't stay there for the next night if you don't have wood, a fireplace, heat, or electric. You have to leave to survive, because it's just going to be a death sentence if you've run out of all mechanisms for heat. You can even use residual gas in a line and a stove for emergency heating, but that is a last case scenario, simply because you're going to be burning up the oxygen in your environment at the same time. Do you have any other last case scenario tips?
Yeah, that's always a very good point. And when you're cold, it's hard to think about anything other than getting warm. But don't do something that's going to put you in a situation where you're sharing oxygen with a device that's going to use up all your oxygen. You want to make sure you've got some airflow coming in, as cold as it may be from the outside, some air coming in. If you can keep your indoor temperature in the 50s and you are bundled up and otherwise free from outside wind, you're going to make it through. You're just going to be awful cold. I got to tell you a little story about a fellow I heard of this last cold spell out here in the Ozarks. He had been living homeless, but he found a spot where he could kind of make a little tent on a porch area. And so he used some tarps and made a tent, and then he used a lot of discarded clothing and made himself a little cave in there. And he would bundle up and crawl into his little cave at night and pull clothes down over the front of it, and he was able to keep warm in his spot with just some body heat. Now, that's a rough way to live. That's hard. It got down to -8 degrees, and this guy made it through that winter. Homeless people are very creative, very inventive. Now, clearly, most of us don't want to be in that situation, so plan ahead so you don't have to make a little cave out of discarded clothing and tarps. But if you have to, that's how to do it. What do you think of that?
Well, let's say we planned ahead and we've gotten through most of the beginner basics about keeping warm. Stay away from cotton. Start understanding that wool is your friend, and locate it at the thrift store and stockpile it. Start buying weekly. If you go to thrift stores every week, there will be a new supply. Your local thrift store employees should know you. If they know you, then you're doing the right thing, and you're making progress. Now let's talk about those people that think that they've got it going on. They're in the suburbs. They're preparing. They got a little food supply. They haven't told anyone. They think they've got a little solar system. They got a little vegetables growing here and there. But let's say the grid goes down for 3 years. An event happens. It's going to be 3-5 years before maybe any electric comes up. There's no more natural gas or heating oil supplies. What do the people in those scenarios need to have in place to survive and thrive in that coming time, which would be post-Zen slap, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, it would. They would have been Zen slap pretty good. At that point, they need community. They need their relationship with their neighbors. They need to know their neighbors, understand what everybody's capable of, who's the good guys, who's not the good guys, and begin to develop a neighborhood defensive posture. You still need your water. In the summer, the weather will warm up unless we get a total glaciation, and that probably wouldn't happen in a year. But you need your water. You need a place to grow food. You need something to eat that's going to go beyond your immediate needs. But I'll tell you, the hardest part of this whole picture is that you don't know at the outset that it's going to last that long or longer. What you think is what I think, which is, well, they'll get it fixed. Power will be back on. And after 3 weeks, a month of that, you start to doubt. That's when your mental structure starts to come apart and people can panic at that point. So if you start making a plan early, even if you never use it, it never hurts to think it through and figure out, what would I do if? Who do I know here that I can count on, who can count on me, who can work with us to develop this neighborhood defensive position? And that's where your thinking needs to go, so that you're not caught unawares and in a total state of shock like many of your neighbors will be. This is particularly difficult for people who need medication, who are on some kind of medication regimen. If they can't get their medication, there's going to be a problem. A lot of people are on psychoactive medications. If they can't get it, I would not be surprised to see unnaturally extreme states of panic or anxiety or depression or things along those lines. Some people having a split with reality. So all of that has to be part of your thinking, as well as eating, keeping warm, and your community defensive position. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that if people haven't developed a sense of community in their area and a preparedness plan for what may happen at that time, I think a lot of people are in for a rude awakening, because SHTF scenario, the first people are going to be affected are the crazies that can't get their medication. In a few weeks, we're talking half the population is basically medicated. You can't quickly come off of antidepressants. So lots of your friends and coworkers are all on antidepressants. If they can't get them anymore, lots of them will become suicidal within a week or so, which is just the nature of not being able to wean yourself off the medicine. So I think the whole zombie apocalypse idea is more of a misnomer. They're not really zombies, but it's the huge portion of the population that are going to react in a very negative way to the Stone Age that is going to be something that the rest of the population has to deal with, which is a total insane situation. So it's important for those that can to put themselves far out of harm's way. If you're far from population centers, you probably won't have to deal with almost any of this, because there'll be a very limited number of that occurring. That's the best way I can think about it. It's not going to be a very good scenario no matter what you think about it, unless you're far away from everybody.
Yes, and even far away from everybody, you need that community of your neighbors and your local townsfolk, if you have them, because none of us function independently. We all have to sleep. The lone wolf who thinks they're going to take a backpack and go out into the woods is going to be in very bad condition pretty early on. There are people who say that if things go really bad, they're not storing up supplies. They're just going to go and take some from their neighbors who are. And I'm sure there's more than one person who thought, well, those Amish have got all kinds of good stuff, and they don't even have guns, so we're just going to go and get it. So, that defensive position is pretty important. Once the initial trauma has been passed through, and I'm sorry to say the initial numbers of people who are going to succumb to the cold and to disease and diarrhea and the early disaster consequences, once those people have passed, then you're going to have much hardier folks who are going to be pretty determined to get what they want. So that defensive position becomes much more important at that point. What do you think of that idea, Diamond?
Well, I've thought it through many times for 20 years now, and I think that in the major population centers, in a long-term scenario, 50 to 75% of the population will be wiped out by diarrhea within the first month. It's a very bad scenario, but we see it occur all the time after major catastrophes, even in third world countries where they know that the water they're drinking is bad. They still have 30% losses in some areas due to dehydration. So you're going to have no access to clean water and food, and you're going to need it while you're sick, and it's just a horrible way to die. That being said, all these lazy people who think they're going to come after everyone else's stuff, what a bad idea, because basically you've decided to live the rest of your life under a hail of gunfire. Those people aren't going to last very long because just in the United States, let's say, do you know how many guns we have just in my area? There's like 3,000 people here. There's probably 1 million guns. So I don't think anyone will even make it out near Colorado if they're coming to take people's stuff because they'll be dead.
Yes, and that's something that these people who have that thought don't realize is that they're not just going to walk in. People are going to resist. And a lot of those people who resist are prepared, and, problem solved.
Yeah, so a few of those marauders might get a few supplies, but they're not going to last long. The marauding groups of people probably is not a real idea. What everyone's going to need to do in the end is to become part of a community. You're going to have to start allowing people into your community once your community is secure, and that's how it's going to move forward. By only adding to your group can you actually survive and thrive and prosper more. It's not going to be the elimination of people, but the addition of people to your group after the event, which makes it easier and more possible to survive.
Absolutely right. That's true. There's nothing in this thinking that is meant to denigrate people or to say some people are better than others. It's simply human nature. This is the way people behave in these situations. We've seen it over and over again. And to pretend like all people are kind, thoughtful, and loving is to live in a fantasy. Even the kindest person can be driven to vicious, deadly behavior when their children's lives are at stake. As a parent, I often said, if anybody touches my kids, I'll kill them. I'll just kill them. It's easy, because that defensive thing comes out in you. And I don't usually have that thought in my head, but you put my kids' lives at stake. And, of course, now they're grown up and huge, but they're still my kids. So if I would hate to be in a position where I had little children and they were very hungry and I had nothing for them. When my kids were little, we went through rough patches. Always had some kind of food. It might not have been what anybody wanted to eat, but it was food. And if you're hungry, you'll eat what you have. So in a way, I think that was really good training for them, and they're not picky eaters now. If there's food and they're hungry, they're going to eat it. So there's some benefits to coming up hard, as they say in the Ozarks. It just gives you an appreciation for what you've got.
Yeah, I think one today can be doing every night is to be learning about wild food. These are called weeds. It's what we've been spraying poisons on for years to kill, to keep off of our lawns, which are inedible. But we really need to relearn this information, because weeds at one time were food. They were the staple food and the green food that were giving all the nutrients to the native populations on planet Earth. They include the simplest things like dandelions and lamb's quarter, which grow almost everywhere in the world today, including the tropics. And you can get a book on eating weeds and start learning today on how to survive and thrive in a time when there will be no food by turning back to Mother Nature herself. The problem with that has been shown in historic times where entire forests have been hunted out of wild game because the population was starving. But what they haven't been removed of is the green leafing material, because many people are just unwilling to eat it to survive, which is completely insane. So start learning about your wild edibles like dandelion and lamb's quarter, and learn how to survive off of weeds that can get you through to the next meal, which is something that we need to be considering as a possible scenario in this coming event. Now, before we hit the commercial, Anita, can you just, do you have any plugs you want to give about your book? All of you listening will be able to get her book for $14.95 free shipping from the link that Oppenheimer Ranch Project provides at the bottom of this podcast when we put it up this weekend. So you'll be able to find that on the YouTube channel. Where is the website that they can get your book at and other topics that you have written on? We'll tell them after the commercial. How about that?
Sounds good.
All right, I'll talk to you in a few minutes, Anita. Guys, thanks for watching, or thanks for listening. We're going to be back in a few minutes after you hear Revolution Radio commercial. If you have a few bucks, donate to the station as a way of thanking them for letting us be on the air. We'll be right back.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit brought into our matrix of truth. With your host, the Solaris Blue Raven. Solaris will bring you an array of unique guests covering topics from ghostly spirits to amazing anomalies, covert technology, UFOs, and shadowy global events.
And that's right here, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Join me weekdays for my new show, Tell Chris Joe. This is going to be a problem show brought to you live from Kensington. Thursdays, I'm dealing with hot topics, heated debate, what's new around the world, and ring-ins to discuss listeners' problems and offering considered and heartfelt solutions. So join me, Chris Hart, for Tell Chris Joe. Stop what you're doing, grab a cup of tea. I'm coming live from Kensington. Relax, let me entertain you with a coffee bar online. Listeners' very personal problems. So that's Thursdays, 2 p.m. in the afternoon, Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. See you there. It's going to be lots of fun.
This is Barbara DeLong, host of Nightlight Radio, inviting you to join me on a cosmic journey, exploring a metaphysical montage of spiritual material, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between, including spiritual readings for those who seek enlightenment. Let Nightlight provide you with equal measure of light, love and laughter, insight, wisdom, and inspiration. Monday nights, 10 to 12 p.m. Eastern, right here on Studio B, Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com.
The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Good evening, folks. This is Diamond from the Oppenheimer Ranch Project, bringing you the second half of The Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the Grand Solar Minimum on Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Studio A. Join us every Wednesday night from 10 to 12 help us welcome our guest for the second half, Dr. Anita Bailey, and she's going to tell you where you can pick up her book and her other titles that she has written over the last few decades. Dr. Bailey, can you help our listeners out?
Yes, I can. The easiest way probably is Amazon.com. There's no discount there. Using the search Cold Times, and that should bring you right there. My previous publication name was Anita Evangelista, spelled just like it sounds. Evangelist with an A at the end, and there's a list of books that are on there. You can also get it with your special discount by going to the publisher's website, which is www.Arctorituspublishing, and I'll spell that, .org/specials with an S at the end. Arctoritus Publishing is AUCTORITAS, and then the word publishing.org. So that should take you right there. It's a $14.95, no shipping charge.
Yeah, and again, for all those listening, you can just go over to the Oppenheimer Ranch Project on YouTube. Check out the most recent videos that I'm putting up. I put a video up every day. I do an update on the weather and the associated changes across the globe associated with the grand solar minimum. And there is a link to Cold Times in the bottom of every one of my videos so that you can get it with free shipping for over 20% off, $14.95. It's literally like a Bible. If you hold it in your hand, it's a very substantial book, and it's filled with tons of information that if you are just beginning, you want to have a hard copy of this so you can use it as a reference manual. And I can't say that enough. In the coming times, the grid, we know, and the mainstream is revealing it to you, the grid is teetering on the edge of failure. It needs to be replaced. It costs trillions to replace, and it is not going to happen. And in the coming times, we're going into very sensitive with our waning magnetosphere and increased space weather affecting the planet more and more as each year progresses. The grid is only going to start failing in a small fashion and continue to cascade into a point of unusability, which is unfortunate for the masses that are not prepared. So we're about to talk about Power and Light, Chapter 9, in the book. Is there anything you wanted to talk about as far as keeping warm that we didn't cover before we jump into Power and Light?
Well, I guess the critical thing is to be thinking ahead once again. Wood heating stoves are probably the most practical for a world without access to propane or oil or any other form of heat. You can buy used but ugly and functional wood stoves now for a couple $100 or less if you shop around and look in the right places. Probably not thrift stores, but certainly at farm auctions or out in the country, antique stores, that kind of thing. Just make sure the firebox does not have a crack in it, and that means you can ask what a firebox is, and somebody will point that out to you, because that's where the burning takes place, and it has to be intact. Be thinking about that, because that's your long-term heat source, and then being in a place where you can get access to burnable wood. Oh, and rocket stoves. Let us not forget rocket stoves. You can build a rocket stove out of a couple of concrete blocks and fuel it, 3 or 4 concrete blocks, I guess would be more correct, and fuel it with small sticks and paper and anything that you can find that's dry. And those things will keep you warm. Not as warm as a big wood stove, but it'll keep you warm enough to keep you from dying, and you can cook on top of them as well. Do you have experience with rocket stoves, Diamond?
Well, I think that a thermal mass rocket stove is what our listeners need to be Googling. thermal mass rocket stove. Put it into Google. You can build one using a 5-gallon spackle bucket and a bag of cement and some leftover PVC pipes. You can see some videos on how they do it. What you get is this large cement block with a 4-inch opening at the base that comes in parallel to the bottom of the bucket, and then it goes to a 2-inch opening that jets up, which is your chimney. And then you can add chimneys and, modify it as you see fit. But this is a small-scale version of, a cement block the size of a spackle bucket that you just put a few twigs in the bottom. It creates a massive draft, and it heats the cement block, giving you that thermal mass, allowing you to cook on it. So it's a way that you can do a weekend project and practice to actually make one for just a couple bucks that will literally save your life, but also giving you the kind of wildcrafting technology that we're going to be needing in the future and ingenuity to get your hands dirty and start making practical things that will allow you to survive and thrive in the coming times. So rocket mass stoves, yes, awesome. And these are things that you can create just by stacking stones together. So understanding what a rocket stove is and what that means and how they work. So the time is now to start researching all these topics. Anything else you can add to that?
Yeah, I'd like to direct your listeners to a YouTube site called Townsends, TOWNSENDS, and just put that in your YouTube, and it will bring you to a site of a fellow who is a recreator of things during the late Middle Ages, and he just is kind of a historian, I guess, and he has many interesting recipes on the way people cooked then and how to make basically a mud brick oven so you can cook in something outdoors. Now, obviously, that's not going to stand up to a heavy rain unless it's under some kind of cover, but it's presented in a fairly light and interesting fashion, so you history buffs are going to find it fascinating as well.
Yeah, these are the type of technologies that were really going to be important. So learning the old technologies, and it's that type of rocket stove technology with massive drafts that led to the commonplace melting of iron and forging metals. And it's literally the type of temperatures you can attain to bend metal and turn simple things like railroad ties into swords. So that's where blacksmithing comes from, the rocket stove technology and that type of high draft, high heat fire with very little combustibles.
Yes, someone who has a blacksmithing skill now who can take that forward into the future is probably going to be a very desirable person and a good profession as well. I've heard of people taking the springs, I forget what they're called, it's the spring in vehicles that help with maintain the comfort of your ride, and turning them into knives because it's a particularly good metal for that sort of thing. So people will become more creative as time goes by, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing.
So let's delve into the more advanced preparedness techniques. If you're in a location that you're going to be sheltering in place, or you're in a rural area where you're preparing, you have a homestead, you're a survivalist, let's talk about power and light. Well, and we covered the most obvious answer for long-term prepping for light and heat, and that is fuel oil. Animal fats. Some of the most ancient lanterns ran off of olive oil, and I actually was gifted one for Christmas a few years back where it has a wick and you can put any vegetable oil in it. It's a very low light and it barely works, but these are some of the types of ways we need to be thinking moving into the future. Can you jump us right into power and light?
That's one of the first issues many people will think of when they think of preparing is, how am I going to keep the TV on, unfortunately? keep my computer running, keep my cell phone up. And these are important questions if things return to normal fairly quickly. You want to make sure you can contact your friends and family on your cell phone or maybe run your computer. Typically, if you're in a situation where we're going forward, those tools may become things of the past. Now, I like my computer. I really like my computer. And I get on the Internet. But if the Internet, for some reason, isn't up and I don't have outside connection to it, I don't need the computer anymore. So we want to be thinking about having books, paper books, because they will outlast our Kindles and our computers. But in the interval, there's an interval between today and whatever this future may bring. And I hope for in some method we're able to maintain power. Perhaps not grid power, but if we have localized power, we can maintain a semblance of the lifestyle that we know now. Now, one of the often overlooked methods of local power is hydroelectric. Now, when you think hydroelectric, you may be thinking of the great dams that turn the turbines that generate the power, and that certainly is the modern system. However, you can do a backyard micro hydropower considerably less expensively than you can do a similar solar system. Now, actually, I guess I need to back up a little bit and explain that any means of generating power, solar, wind, hydro, or whatever, the aim of that is to store energy in a form that's usable. And all of these ultimately rely on some kind of a battery backup plan. Between your power generating system, your solar, your wind, or whatever, and your battery is an array of devices that convert the incoming electricity into a form that can be stored in the battery. That is most commonly called a charge controller. And that takes in the original form and helps store it. And then you need a method to retrieve the power from your batteries. One of the simplest devices that we're all familiar with are our automobiles. It is a system that is gasoline powered or diesel or perhaps electric. And when you're driving that, except for your electric car, it's generating power. It's generating power to recharge the battery in your car. So if you want to recharge some smaller batteries or even a deep cycle marine type battery, you simply need to have a means to connect it to the power system in your car. And for typical home use, you simply plug in a battery charger into your cigarette lighter outlet if you have one. Most cars have a version of that. I guess they don't call them cigarette lighters anymore, but that DC charger there. And you can certainly charge your cell phone. Most everybody who's got a cell phone and is driving is able to or knows how to do that. Well, just why not charge a larger battery at the same time? Now, you're driving, you're burning gasoline, you're doing that anyway, but you're charging a household battery at the same time. You can do the same if you can't get out and drive. You can run that car in your driveway and charge the battery right there. Or you can pop the battery out and bring it in the house and run small devices off of that as well, if you have an inverter and the hookups to your battery. So be thinking about basic ways. Don't think about powering your air conditioner, your microwave, or your freezer off of a battery system that small. But start small and learn as much as you can. Try to do it fairly quickly, because I don't think we've got years to come to this knowledge. Have you used something like that?
I would agree that we don't have years to come to the knowledge, but there's plenty of information online that you can get. I was just watching an episode of Prepper Nurse 1 on YouTube, and he's completely off-grid using a solar system, which is relatively small, 3,000 watts, to get about 3 kilowatts per day charged into some batteries. And he's running a full-size refrigerator in 2 places that only stays on for half of the day. But during half of that day, he freezes tons of water in jugs in the top, and then when it shuts off at night, he puts the frozen jugs in the bottom, and it's a cycle of using the daylight sun to keep his refrigerator working on very little wattage, completely off-grid. It's a unique and interesting system that's working for him, and no normal person would be doing that today, but it's something that tens of thousands will be doing in the near future. That being said, the type of batteries that you have on site are very important because let's take the most common King battery, the lead-acid battery. They're only going to last for 10 years, and then all of those batteries will be dead. Do you know a little bit about the types of batteries available now and their longevity, and do you have any recommendations? Because I have some information, and I'd like to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, batteries are going through a change right now, and the old-style automotive batteries are adequate, but as you said, they don't last long, and they certainly don't tolerate a deep drawdown. You can't take all the power out of them and expect them to recharge and continue functioning at high capacity. Marine deep cycle batteries and electric golf cart batteries are some of the better versions that will tolerate being used and drawn down. But even those, you don't want to continually draw them down to next to zero before you recharge them because it shortens your battery life. I think on one of your YouTube shows you were mentioning a type of battery that can last quite a bit longer.
Yeah, the knife battery, and it's nickel iron. So you also have the nickel cadmium battery and the nickel iron battery. And the NiCad, we know, is the one you buy pre-charged that you throw out. I mean, those will be important for a short period of time because you can buy thousands of them and store them. And if you keep them in a relatively cool place, they'll keep their charge for 5 or 10 years, maybe. 10 is pushing it. But the nickel iron technology, which is coming out of Iron Edison, which is called a knife battery, NIFE, Ni being nickel, Fe being iron, uses a safe electrolyte, is flushable, and can literally be used indefinitely. They're just very expensive. So if you're looking into a long-term solution, this is a huge investment that could really pay out.
Get your food in first and your water in first. Those are the critical things that you need. We can live without the power. We won't be as comfortable by any means. People did it for millions of years. But you've got to survive the initial difficult first years when people are in a state of turmoil, where the economy is in a dismal condition, where food resources are hard to come by. You've got to get through that phase. If you do have power, even if you have lamps on, you want to make sure you have heavy-duty curtains that don't allow the light to be seen outside of your residence or wherever you're keeping your light. Because in a grid-down situation, that light can be seen for miles. It is literally a beacon. When we had that ice storm in 2007, driving down the roads, you could tell who had some kind of power. In some homes, you could see a single light in the living room look like a candle or maybe an oil lamp. I remember in one home seeing someone passing from window to window and then upstairs because their curtains were open. they're looking out, and they did not realize people could see them moving in their house. And that was maybe a flashlight. So you don't want to be in a position where you're announcing, look, I've got all the good stuff here. Another thing that you can get fairly inexpensively today are solar yard lights, the kinds you see at places like Lowe's and Walmart that leave them out in the sun during the day. You can bring them in at night, and they give a fair light. You won't be stumbling over the furniture, but you're probably not going to be able to do really fine work with them. But they're inexpensive. They recharge every day that they're out in the sun, and they'll give you light for a couple of years if you take care of them. Then the solar panel tends to cloud over on them, and they're harder to maintain. But keep those small backup AA batteries and AAA batteries, and even that, if you have rechargeables and you have a small solar panel, you can keep enough light in your home to be comfortable there. But once again, make sure you've got those curtains up so you're not announcing to the world that you're doing okay while everybody else is struggling.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty important point. Do not draw attention to yourself, especially in the initial times. And I think that that's going to work itself out, however it does work itself out, in a horrible way in the inner cities, in a different way in the suburbs. But if you're in a rural area, you really need to be focusing on organizing your group for security and also organizing your resources. Maybe you all are cooking in a central location. You're delegating the workforce and the security issues. It is really going to be a community effort where you're going to need to be voting on, the way the group feels and the direction you're going to be going. And it's really going to be a new way of thinking that allows the groups that do survive to survive and thrive.
I would agree with that. In a suburban setting where you have a group that has a strong defensive position, and I'm not saying go out and attack other people, I'm saying just make sure you're not getting into trouble from marauders. That group will have the capacity eventually to utilize resources that have been lost and forgotten by other people. So if you can get through that initial difficult stage, I think things become a little bit easier. We see this in history. After the Black Plague swept through Europe, the survivors had the resources of a much larger population that they could utilize. And you certainly don't want to be one of those people who thinks ahead and says, boy, won't that be great when I can go and, get my neighbor's XYZ. Because like the Black Death, it was a terrible transition period. Terrible. And I certainly hope we don't have to go through that, because our people today are even less prepared than what they were back then, when the vast majority of the populace knew how to grow food and knew how to keep it. We just don't now.
I'd like to talk a little bit about some important tidbits in the last half hour here associated with power and light going out. And I really like the rechargeable landscape lights. Those have been mentioned in all different types of places. They're easily accessible for $1 each. Some of them are $4. So maybe you can get some of the higher power ones and stockpile a bunch of the smaller ones. If you don't pull the tabs off of those and you store them in a dark place, you could pull them out 10 years from now and have a brand new solar lighting system. So they're really an important thing, and maybe a type of bartering tool which you can stockpile 5 or 6 of these a week until you have hundreds of them, which aren't turned on, that you're just putting in a dark, cool place with your other survival gear. Another thing I think is really important for everyone to buy and own right now is a crank-up weather radio. I have several crank-up weather radios that also have flashlights incorporated in them. and they last for up to 10 or 15 years, depending on how often you use them. But they are going to be crucial in a grid down time for you to get information if there are still radio waves being broadcast, which there probably will be, because there are many savvy ham operators that have, remote power systems that are going to be operating for a very long time. Tell me your thoughts on what I said, and do you have any other important tidbits to really allow people to get information and thrive when the lack of information is available?
Ham operators are one of your best sources. Now, your local public library is still a good source for paper books. And if there is a truly bad calamity, the library is not going to be one of the first places people go to loot. So if you have access to that, that's a place to go and get how-to books of all different kinds, health books, informational books, survival books, some fiction, so you've got something to do on those long nights, all kinds of useful materials. Make your community, your small defensive community, a place where books can be traded, shared, and provided to others. That's truly your greatest resource, is the skills you have and the knowledge you have going forward. That's how you make yourself valuable to a community and a person who has something to fall back on in their own internal perception of things. If you can start a fire using flint and steel, you're miles ahead. And that's a learned skill. You can learn it now. You can learn it with your kids. It can be a fun adventure. Let's see if we can start a fire. Don't obviously teach your kids not to be starting fires all over the place, but if you need that skill, you'll have it. And that's a pretty important thing right there. I kind of got myself off the track. Now I'm thinking of all the good books in the library. So would you repeat your question for me?
So what you're saying is that while you're looting the library, if there's anyone else in there looting, you should probably make friends with them.
I like that. That's a good idea. Yeah. Yeah. So ham operators are good resources. If you know someone who's a ham operator, they love to talk about ham and how they set up their system and how they power it. And many of them are quite well prepared for a grid down situation. They live for those times. And they'll talk about batteries and how they keep things charged and how long their system will run on what kind of backup power they have and those sort of things. Very, very well prepared by and large. Now, that's with their ham system. I don't know how their food and water system is, but they can keep that ham radio going.
Yeah, and as far as ham radio is concerned, I think that if you are preparing for the coming times, it is imperative that you get your ham license. The only way you can operate a ham radio is if you get your operator's ham license. It used to be more difficult than it is now. You can actually easily do it within a week. You just have to Google the information and go over to the AARL, the Amateur Association of Radio Operators there, and you can do it online. Once you get your operator's license, you can purchase a portable ham radio for just a few $100s off of Amazon these days. And you can get your feet wet into operating on ham so you can get the information you need if the grid goes down. And maybe the only way to communicate for years to come in the future. Do you have any other tidbits you could share with getting your ham license or anything to that effect?
Yeah, the test itself is simple memory work. You don't have to understand the concepts. You just have to know what the right answer is. And I believe the AARL has links to all the test questions plus the correct answers. And the test, I think, I could be wrong, is 30 or 50 questions but they have a test bank of some 300 questions. So if you just sit down with the test bank and go over it and over it and over it until you know the correct answer, you'll be ready for anything. You don't, like I said, you don't have to understand radio wave propagation or atmospheric effects as long as you can give them the correct answer. Now, it's kind of sad that it's gotten to that, but, you know, a lot of people who are interested in ham just aren't interested in learning all the details of radio technology and that sort of thing. All they need is the correct answer. They don't need to know you're a radio genius to pass the test. And you don't have to know Morse code. It's a good thing to know, but you don't have to.
Yeah, I think that by being a ham operator, what you're going to be able to do is get a lot of inside information during times when information is sparse. So it is crucial, if you're not going to procure a ham radio for yourself, your community, or your family, to locate a ham operator in your area and get them part of your group immediately. Another interesting topic we didn't touch on is wood gasifiers. I think that wood is the most critical thing moving into the coming times, that you need to have an endless supply, so to speak, of wood for building structures, for heating, for keeping warm, for eating, and also for making power. Wood gasifiers run on wood, and they can be used as a generator to power all things electric. They don't require the sun. Do you have any info or insight on wood gasifiers?
I've been looking at some of the projects on, and I think they're very doable with some basic skills such as welding ability and stuff like that. If it's something you want to do, you need to get your skills now, because you're not going to learn to weld when everything's going to heck in a handbasket around you. They look like a very viable project. Otherwise, I don't have any personal experience with them.
There are several models that are available for purchase. They're very expensive, a couple $1,000s. But if you have the money, you don't have to learn the skill in building them, and you can just buy one and store it like you would a generator, which everyone should have a gas generator for the time right after there's an immediate grid down, some type of immediate plug-in to keep your foods refrigerated for in the short term, so you can be alive and thrive while you're waiting for more information. So I think it's important to have multiple different types of alternative energies. That way, depending on what happens, you'll be able to continue moving forward without panicking.
Yes, that's ultimately that's the objective of preparing and storing up, is to give yourself options. When you have the options, there's a whole lot less worry and concern if something goes wrong. For example, many people who have the backup generator, power goes down, their biggest concern is getting out there to put the gas or diesel in the generator every number of hours. That's a pretty small concern compared to somebody who's going, oh my gosh, my refrigerator, everything's melting out and falling on the floor, and what are we going to eat? And I can't see anything because the lights are out. So you can have a calamity that for somebody is more a mild inconvenience, and for someone else becomes the disaster story of their life. And it all depends on taking these steps in advance. So you give yourself options, and you can come through those initial stages, perhaps not in total comfort, but a lot more comfortable than many of your neighbors will come through it. Are you seeing that to be the case in your area, Diamond?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. But what happens in my area is that every single family has their own system of self-reliance, because people are programmed out here to maybe to get stuck for 3 or 5 days. It's not a big thing. Everyone has some sort of extra something. If not, their neighbor does, or their neighbor's neighbor does, and they know where to get it, where there's not a panic situation here. So for the last 20 minutes or 25 minutes, I want to talk about staying healthy in the very beginning times when the SHTF event occurs, the grid's down, people are panicking. You've put yourself in the right spot with your community. What does that community need to be producing as far as small-scale livestock to start to feed the people that need food? What we have here, we have a nice chicken flock. It's providing maybe 25 dozen eggs a week, which means we can harvest some birds during those weeks and make more chickens at the same time. Because there's only a few people here, we have a surplus of eggs, which we can be trading for other foodstuffs coming from our neighbors. Maybe, let's say, a neighbor who has dairy goats and we need some milk. They're just a block away in rural terms, which means 3 houses down. So we have a method of barter already in place in our lower valley here, and all types of small-scale livestock, ducks, chickens, fowl, pigs, sheep. We have it going on everywhere here where I can just drive up the road and find a pair of goats or pigs and buy it or trade it for my neighbor. Most people can't do that. What type of small-scale animal production should people be thinking about getting into that they can easily increase the production to maybe survive and thrive and help feed the people in their community?
One of the easiest backyard livestock that you can keep in, I would probably say most suburban areas, are rabbits. Rabbits are quiet, they're clean, they produce a wonderful manure that can go right on your garden and will not burn your plants. They can live off of collected greenery or off of a pelleted feed, which you can store in advance. A single female rabbit bred at a pretty high rate, which is once every month, she'll just keep cranking out babies, can produce almost as much meat by weight in a year as a cow. Now, that's a high-producing rabbit. Typically, you'd breed your female rabbit every 3 months or so. And one female plus her male friend can produce a litter of 8 to 10 rabbits on average, sometimes more, sometimes less. And within 8 weeks, those bunnies will be at butchering age, which is around 5 pounds. Each of those bunnies will give you about half the live weight in meat, so around 2.5, 3 pounds. So at 10 bunnies in a litter, you've got 30 pounds of meat. And it's good, clean, white meat, very low in fat, tastes like chicken. I hate to say it, but it does. And can be used in any chicken recipe. It's a very, very good meat. But the benefit of raising rabbits is you can have you can have a couple of 2-3 rabbits on your balcony, and if you clean up the manure every day, nobody will know. They're that quiet and without the real nasty manure odors that you can have with other barnyard livestock. Chickens, of course. If you can keep chickens in your suburban backyard, 2 or 3 hens who do not need a rooster in order to produce eggs will give you 2 or 3 eggs a day. And if you're not eating eggs as your exclusive protein source, they'll stack up pretty fast. And any hen that gets elderly can go in the stew pot. Just my recommendation always is don't give your animals that you're going to eat a name, because you won't be able to eat them if you name them and make them a pet. Name them fried or hamburger or a pork chop. Pork chop's a good name. And then it's never easy to slaughter an animal, but it gives you a little distance if from their moment of birth until their demise they are considered food.
Yeah, and rabbits and chickens multiply so quickly that it's easy to name the parents, which are your breeding pair, and to only eat their siblings. You just don't name them because they produce so many, which is kind of a key. A stealth way to be prepping without anyone knowing, like you said, is rabbits. You just have the breeding pairs separated so they're not breeding like rabbits, so to speak. And when the event happens where you just, you bring them together and you start making babies immediately. Chickens are a little more difficult to do that with because they're loud, and then you got the roosters to deal with. But there is a tip. There is a type of duck that we raise here called Muscovy ducks that are silent. So you could have a breeding pair of Muscovy ducks making duck eggs for you, and they'd be completely silent. You could use a little baby pool. They don't require much space, basically a doghouse. And so ducks are a silent way to get eggs and bird protein, which is duck meat is high in fat. And can you talk a little bit about the need for animal fats in the coming times? Just to stay healthy, the fact that you're going to be burning more calories from the stress and the nutritional component.
Animal fats are critical. And I know we've been taught our whole lives that it's like eating poison if you eat saturated fat. But people have been eating that since people were eating. So this is something our bodies are well adapted to. The saturated fats are hard on us now because we don't get any exercise and we're always in moderate climate, indoors and outdoors. But if the weather turns bad, your body will absolutely require fat. I mentioned in the book that I knew a man some years ago who had been stationed in, I believe it was Alaska, and as part of the rations the men there were given, they received a cup of bacon grease with brown sugar in it every day. And his initial response on seeing that was, oh my gosh, this is disgusting. So he had to kind of gag it down. But the second and third day, he started to like it. And after that, it was, oh boy, this is great. We're going to have some of this now. Because his body needed it. He absolutely needed it in order to get through the rigors of that environment. So in the same way, someone may not prefer fats, but it is a good thing to have. And butter is a delicious and very nutritious and higher calorie resource that most people find very, very tasty. So that's something that you can stock up, or you can make from your dairy animals as well. Fats contain more calories per gram, almost a little more than double the amount of calories per gram as carbohydrates or protein. Carbohydrates are usually fast energy, and protein sticks with you. You need all of these. And going into really bad cold times, all food is good. We're not going to be afraid of food like we are now. All food is good food. What are your thoughts on that?
There's historical evidence that fats are the key to survival in the cold. I'm sure some of our listeners know Ernest Shackleton and his adventures into Antarctica back at the turn of the century. He actually left a large number of his crew in Antarctica, and they got separated for half a year. The only thing that crew had to live on was a product called hoosh, H-O-O-S-H, which was their lamp oil, which was a concoction of seal and whale blubber, and they ate it. That was the only food they had. So they ate the hoosh. It was also what they read by and what kept them warm in the igloo-type structures they lived in. But if it weren't for the hoosh, which was pure blubber, they wouldn't have heat, they wouldn't have food, and they wouldn't have lived.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's amazing. Well, you think of the Inuit up there in the cold climates in Alaska and the Arctic. What did they eat? It was fatty fish, seal, walrus, whale blubber. People can live on that. It's kind of the ketogenic diet.
Well, bacon's America's favorite food, isn't it? And that's the bacon. That's the belly fat of the pig. And if you go to a fancy restaurant, if you actually buy it without the meat in it, it's just the pig belly, pork belly could be up to $20 a pound to buy it, and that's just blubber. It used to be free and garbage.
Yes, that's right. Well, we've become so afraid of food in our modern society. It's kind of funny when you think about what people have learned to eat in the past. I think I mentioned eating snails. The French delicacy of snail. At some time in the past, somebody was really hungry when they were out in their garden, and they looked at a snail and said, I wonder if I could eat that. Now, I don't go out in my garden now and say, boy, that sure looks good. I can hardly wait to throw that snail on the grill. But people learned to eat it because they had to. So in the same way, the foods that have frightened us in our culture today, at some point we're going to look at that and say, I wonder why I ever thought I shouldn't eat that, because it's keeping me alive.
Yeah, so let's get back to rabbits. Rabbit is actually some of the least fatty meat around, which makes it extremely healthy as far as white meats. And I don't know why the American market doesn't eat more rabbit. It's because we tend to keep them as pets. But here, the best, I'm going to give you some of the best rabbit breeds to be breeding. The number one on many lists is the New Zealand white. This is the big white bunny that you see around with red eyes. They can be 9 to 12 pounds each. And it's a top pick for many breeders because of the size, the New Zealand white. The most common around here is the California rabbit, which is also white, but is more like fat with a black nose and black feet. They're also quite big. The American chinchilla, which is not a chinchilla but a rabbit, but looks like a chinchilla, is what a lot of people around here grow, and they just look like a wild brown rabbit, the kind you see running around here. There's also silver foxes, which are fuzzy and black and very difficult to kill because they look like little stuffed animals. There's champagne, which is more of a speckled. Cinnamon rabbits are good for breeding, as well as satin rabbits, the Rex rabbit, and the Palomino rabbit. There's also the Flemish giant, which is pretty rare and also looks more like a dog. Do you know about any other rabbit breeds you can mention?
Those are all good breeds. If you like to work with rabbit hair, the very soft Angora fiber, there is the Angora rabbit, although they are not good meat producers, but you can still eat them. Not good in the same way that the New Zealand or the Californian is. They're still perfectly edible if you have an excess of bunnies, but they do have that wonderful, soft, warm fiber, which is another way to get fiber for if you want to spin or weave.
Yeah, a lot of people have alpacas over here because you get just the sheer number of fiber you get out of your herd.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's a wonderful warm fiber, and they're also really good pack animals if you need to be carrying something over a distance because they're very, very steady-footed, kind of like a donkey. And I hate to go there, but they are perfectly edible, and people do eat them in their native country. So we need to kind of keep that in the back of our mind when we consider what livestock we're going to have.
Yeah, they're deliciously edible. They produce easily. They require almost no care. They almost don't drink any water. Just a few gallons a day for an entire herd. And they all poop in the same pile, and their manure is the most prized manure of any of the animal manures for organic gardening. I just don't know why we're not eating more alpaca and using more alpaca to grow our foods. And we're definitely going to have alpaca here at the ranch.
Yeah, well, they're awful cute and fuzzy, and that's part of our problem in this culture with livestock is anything cute and fuzzy, we anthropomorphize and put Disney eyes on it, and it's just cute, and you can't eat cute. So this is going to be a big step for a lot of people when cute ends up on the dinner table.
I assure you, you spend a few days with an alpaca, they'll spit on you, kick on you, and poop on you. You're not going to think they're that cute. Yeah, they're crazy animals, and I've only recently been able to spend some time with them. But a really amazing animal, perfectly suited for where I'm at, and an excellent pack animal. Definitely something we have to be thinking about in the future. Now, we got 9 minutes left. Is there anything else from the 3 topics that we talked about you think we missed and we should be talking about for 9 more minutes?
Well, keeping well in these coming conditions, stress relief is going to be very important, and that's why in a lot of calamitous situations, the use of alcohol and other substances that people utilize to calm down goes up. If people can't get their pharmaceuticals, they're going to be looking for something to replace them. Now, I'm not suggesting that you pour alcohol down the throat of someone who's really anxious, but all of those other medicinals, cannabis is very helpful for people who are distressed. Having a supply of smokes will get smokers through a really hard period. Smokes are very critical for people who utilize them, and they're so important that they are a currency in many prisons. Trading smokes for things. So that's another something where, as a culture, we need to get past is worrying that somebody is going to be enjoying a substance of some kind. The stress level is going to be so high. Consider also herbal remedies. Valerian is very good for reducing stress. Even chamomile for kids who are stressed out. Very, very good. The level of panic and fear among people who are unprepared, I'm afraid, will be fairly high. And you even see that in these relatively routine weather events, hurricanes and what have you. Other methods of reducing that, meditation. If someone's a meditator, that's a good thing to do. Prayer is helpful. Breathing exercises and so forth. Another thing we want to be thinking about is basic hygiene, and that goes out the window when people are in conditions like this. I'm always horrified when I see pictures like from the hurricane with groups of people walking through this nasty water waist deep. Oh my goodness. It's not just seawater and rain there. It's every chemical that's been put on the ground, that's been washed out of houses, that's come out of department stores and so forth. It's a frightening concoction, and we need to be thinking about these things. I'll give you an example of that. After the big tornado that hit Joplin a few years ago, Joplin, Missouri, I was with a search team, and we were in a place where a home store had been devastated. And not our search team, but another one sent in some of their good dogs to see if there was anybody in the collapsed building. And the dogs sniffed around for a while and came out, and they were sick. They were vomiting and collapsed. And it was from the sheer number of chemicals that had been damaged and opened and spread over the floor and mixed. So we need to be thinking about that and realize that something that looks okay is not okay. For goodness sake, do not drink that water. The bacteria is going to be bad enough, but a brew of chemicals, you're going to be in a bad place. You probably, without medical care, won't make it through. So just be conscious of hygiene. Clean, fresh water. You can pass relatively clean water through a filter. We talked about this before, but you can boil water, and it'll kill all the bacteria, but it won't take out the chemicals. So find yourself a way to get rainwater, which is a good source of relatively clean water, and even just putting pots and canisters out when it's raining will get you some fresh water. Anytime you have a skin injury, treat it. And I know for a lot of manly men, it's very hard to say, look, I got a scratch here, what do I do about it? Treat it. Put some peroxide on it. Wash it very thoroughly in clean water and soap. Use antibacterial soap if you have any. If you don't, clean water. Scrub it out good. Even the littlest scratch can become horribly infected in situations like that. So be thinking hygiene and think beyond the everyday and where your risks are. For many people, if you're not current on your tetanus shots, it wouldn't hurt you to get one now. You go into your doctor and say, look, I need a tetanus shot, and they'll slam it on board. So it's better to get it now. It's good for about 7 to 10 years, and it'll get you through this rust spell. Can you think of
absolutely the smallest scrape? Even the cleanest water can have bacteria that will send you into toxic shock, cause you to become dehydrated and die quickly. So learn about securing water sources safely. You can learn how to filter water through sand and burnt charcoal, and then take through a bucket, then boil it and have safer outcomes. But I agree with you, collecting rainwater is your number one source of safe water to begin with. And also learn about your wild edibles. There are medicinals all over the world that you can immediately pack on that cut or scrape, including plantain, which grows over 80% of the surface of the planet. You simply chew it up in your mouth, make a poultice, put it on the wound, and wrap it up. Yarrow. This is a plant growing in late summer almost all over the world. Learn how to source it. It is a great astringent and analgesic. Plantain and wild edibles are also edible, meaning you can eat them. So not only will they save your life by disinfecting your cut, but you can make a salad and give you the nutrition you need to keep your immune system up. I met some guys at Hemp Lucid, which is a full plant cannabis company out of Utah at the Observing the Frontier conference. They're making full plant cannabis oils. They're available for the entire public. Because CBD is legal in all states and in many countries. It's like making a full plant tincture with the THC, except the THC is removed. And this is a type of tincture you can stockpile and keep. It'll keep for years in a cool place and be bioavailable as medicine. And the cannabis medicines treat so many things, especially hypertension, which is going to be critical because people are literally going to be losing their mind. So it's important to keep your head on in a survival situation so you can be thinking clearly. You know what's important, securing food and water. And the Hemp Lucid Company, it gives all of our subscribers 20% off their products. So if you're looking into stockpiling CBD, you can come look for that link, which is right under your book link in all of my videos, so that the general public that is smart and informed and stockpiling can get the best deal, so that they can literally be spending all of their dollars wisely and stockpiling the things they need to survive and thrive in the coming times. That's the reason I'm, overextending myself with my YouTube channel and this radio program and my ranch, because I am compelled to share the information I know with the general public. Because it's just in my nature. I think that if I'm capable of doing it and I'm not doing it, I feel I'm responsible. There are many peoples in the public sector that probably want to be doing the types of things I'm doing, but they can't because they have families to think about. They have 401ks. Guys, if you get real and think this through, none of that is important. You really should be converting a lot of that money you've stockpiled into tangible, valuable products that your family can survive and thrive in the changing times. It is not going to be all tea and roses in the coming years. You're seeing it unfold before your very eyes in the catastrophic climatic events which are wreaking havoc across the country. The time is now to start preparing. Anything else you want to throw in there before we close up this evening? Anita's going to be joining us for one more week where we're going to sum it all up when the SHTF occurs, what we need to do and what the focus is. Anita, you want to say goodbye to our listeners before we roll?
Thank you, folks, and you, Scott and Diamond. I think it's been a real good one this time.
Yeah, they could hear us. And join us next week for the final episode of March Preparedness Month, where we have Anita back on and we sum up proper prior planning prevents piss poor performance. Shoot a donation to Freedom Slips. I want to thank Scott McDonough, our new producer, for producing an awesome show this week. Guys, check out our YouTube channel over at Oppenheimer Ranch Project on YouTube, and we will see you all next week right here on The Inconvenient Truth, prepping for the grand solar minimum. Thanks, guys, and that's a boom.